many brown bags, which means that I hope everybody has a wonderful lunch either after this, or I hope you ate, oh, we have one brown bag in the back. Perfect. So, how many of you are locals? How many of you live here? Oh wow, awesome. Well, you are gonna learn a lot about not just our built and natural environment here in Steamboat Springs, but the city's historic preservation program and what that means for preserving our history. And not just our landscapes, not just our buildings, but the stories of the people who made this place what it is today. And not just the people who we know about, but those that we don't know about. So what we need to learn more about and what we need to preserve. So what is historic preservation? Can anybody elaborate for me? We're gonna do a little, interactive branding session here. Can anybody go beyond what this statement says? Except for Honoranthi and our two HBC members here. So it really is an effort to preserve and conserve and protect our, not just the built environment, but again, our oral histories, right? And objects. So we have wonderful museums like this that they hold on to what is important, what is tangible, but they also tell the stories of what is intangible, right? So what we don't see behind that building, what we don't see behind that ranch, behind the landscape. So historic preservation really began as a movement well before the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. Some people say that it began with the Antiquities Act. So there's a little controversy about that of, what antiquities were taken from who and from where. But when we look at historic preservation locally, we look at what's important to Colorado's history. So Colorado has a vast, vast history that goes well beyond 1876. We all know that. We're coming up on what is called our bisesquicentennial, I believe, in 2026, which is very exciting. But we really have to recognize the people that came before our Western Anglo history, right? Does anybody know which Native American tribes came before and were established here today?
The Utes.
Thank you. And then we also had some of the Northern Arapaho tribes. And is there one other, Katie?
A little Shoshone, but
Little
mostly
Shoshone. Yeah. And so what makes Steamboat different than other small ski town communities? I like to think that it's the dual aspects of our heritage. We have roots in Western ranching, and then we have this amazing boom of the ski industry, which really people think of, Steamboat Springs as the mountain of Steamboat, which didn't begin until the late 60s and 70s. But skiing here really began in 1913 with Carl Howelson. I'm sure you all know about him. So when you think about Carl Howelson, what do we think about locally here? Jumping. Howelson Hill, the Winter Carnival. So those are all things that help us preserve our history, even Winter Carnival. I've heard people wanting to historically designate events, and maybe we should. So what is considered historic? Hypothetically, anything over 50 years of age. Is anybody in this room over 50 years of age?
No, not a one.
Not one. So it's any building, structure, site, object, or sign that is over 50 years of age. And what that means is, let's take the Backdoor Burger building across the street. That building's over 50 years of age. But is it historically significant? Is it historically important? And so that is what preservationists do. We look and we evaluate and we analyze, and we do that with three major categories. We look at historical and social importance, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We look at architectural importance. So does the building, does the landscape, do the buildings on the landscape have architectural importance? And then we look at geographic importance. And those are three very broad categories. They can be broken up, in many different ways. But does anybody know what geographic importance is actually looking at?
The spring, the Bubble Up Spring.
That's a good one. So when we look at who remembers going on their first hike with their family and your parents or your brothers or your siblings helping you identify how to wayfind around that mountain. Maybe it's a rock that's visually important that helps you locate yourself, right? So that's what we think of in terms of geographic importance. Can anybody mention a few things that might help us geographically locate ourselves here in Steamboat?
Rabbit ears.
Perfect. You guys got this right on the dot. So we just did a preservation tax credit workshop and no one knew the answer and they were all preservationists. So you guys are well ahead of your time. I mean, Arianthi and I may have, but you know. So Rabbit Ears Motel sign is actually on the state register and it's on our local register, and it is important because of its geographic importance to our community. We all locate, you know, coming down Rabbit Ears Pass and going into Old Town from the Rabbit Ears Motel sign. Did anybody know that the eyeballs used to blink and move? Kind of fun. So then we have architectural importance, and I put architectural and historic importance here. So this is the Crawfords, I believe, second home, Katie?
Oh, geez, sorry.
No, you're fine.
That's the third
The
one.
third home. And so this site is important. It's actually not on our local register. It's on our national register, and I'll talk about these programs in a little bit. But it is architecturally important because it is a wonderful standing gem of a structure. It's also historically important because of the Crawfords, right? They're a family that helped build Steamboat after the Utes came, and yeah. And then we have pure historical importance. So what does that mean? Because we keep using the word history and we're in a history museum. So can anyone elaborate on that a little? You're really talking about the people, right? So the people here that lived in this home, the people that may have ranged, you know, on a pasture. And so here, this home is actually, according to our architectural inventory form, which I'll go into, we consider this not eligible for being important in a preservation term. I might have a different opinion of that, but this is 530 Pine Street. And on your right, you'll see the original home. This photograph was taken in the early 1900s. And it was the home of Sheriff Charles Neiman. He was also the superintendent of the school district here. And I think this home should be designated for many reasons. Does anybody know about Sheriff Charles Neiman?
I do.
Katie?
Well, at one time, Routt County included all of Moffat County as well, so it was a giant area. And the sheriff at the time, 1880s, was this dude, and he happened to be the sheriff in charge when a guy named Harry Tracy was running and murdering people all over the West.
And Harry Tracy was the last living member of Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch.
Yeah, mostly kind of went on his own, and made a huge. He went everywhere. And we have lots of programs and an exhibit upstairs if you want to get into it more, including his leg irons. Nyman is the only one who successfully captured Harry Tracy and put him in what at the time was our county jail all the way to Hans Peak. So he tracked him from Browns Park to the county jail, which was in Hans Peak, which would have taken many days. And he tricks the jailer and breaks out and runs again. And Ivan chases him here to Steamboat Springs. Eventually he goes to Aspen, makes his way through Oregon, and it's like really the last gunfighter government showdown.
Wow.
So that's what he's best known for, but he actually had large impacts on the county as well as sheriff. Yeah.
Question?
Another prominent Neiman started Neiman Marcus in Dallas, Texas.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know how early that was, but it was pretty early. My mother in 1980 was a staunch customer. He established the personality of Dallas. It was sophisticated. They had road shows, they had fashion, and lovely restaurants. And Neiman and Marcus started the trend.
I would have never even known that Neiman Marcus came from Dallas, but I guess
Yeah.
Yes.
the big hair. Yeah, everything's big. Everything's bigger in Texas,
My
right?
mother was born in 1908, and it was going strong by the time she was old enough to.
We
shop
don't
there.
have, there's no confirmation between this and that though. Just so.
But
This-
that does-
This person and that company, we don't have, I'm not able to confirm to everyone that they're related.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't either, but I wonder.
But I think that brings up a
We
wonderful
would check.
point
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how does genealogy, right, and tracing of family lineages tie into
Yeah.
our history, right? Our families, who's related to who. One other funny story I'd like to say about Charles, am I pronouncing his last name wrong? Neiman?
I see. What do you guys say?
I would have said Neiman, but maybe the German way would be Neiman.
I always thought it was
German would be, yeah.
Well,
Either or.
before Sheriff Neiman brought Harry Tracy to the Hans Peak jail, they were camping overnight, and he was with a group of other law enforcement officers, and every single person wanted to lynch Harry Tracy, and our sheriff talked them out of it because he wanted to see due process. And sadly, if they would have just maybe lynched him, right? Not as many people would have died in between, the breakout in the Hans Peak jail all the way through Aspen and back into Oregon. So, there are pros and cons of due process, I guess, right? Question?
So did Neiman live in that house?
He did.
Yeah.
And so back to what is historical importance, a lot of times it's that social importance, the history of the people, the stories that lay behind the walls. And a lot of times, actually there's a movement right now in preservation where we're really trying to look beyond the building, right? So you can see this building has been significantly altered, right? They built a huge barn-shaped 2-story garage, attached it to it. So from an architectural standpoint, this resource is jeopardized, right? But from a social standpoint, his home is still standing. It's still here. You can still see its original shape, its original form. So that's kind of the difference between architectural importance and historical or social importance. And so I keep talking about designating and listing and whatnot. So you've all heard of historical societies. Some people call them hysterical societies. They might chain themselves to a building so it doesn't get torn down. But when the National Historic Preservation Act began in 1966, it allowed the federal government to create its own honorary program to honor places of importance. And it's referred to as the National Register of Historic Places. And the program also allows the state, every single state, to operate what's called a state historic preservation office. In Colorado, we like to be different and we call everything different. So ours is called the Office of Historic Preservation and Archaeology. So we have a OHAP, not a SHPO. Does anybody know what our major listing locally is on the National Register of Historic Places?
Depot.
That's a good one. I'll give you a hint, it includes multiple buildings. Courthouse, not so much. Katie's working on that.
Not listed, can you believe
no,
it?
I know.
It's listed in the district, not individually, but So it's listed.
Here in Yansview.
Hey, good one.
Good one. So our largest collection of properties and places on the National Register is our downtown along Lincoln Avenue, from about the middle of 5th Street, as Arianthi was saying, which does include the courthouse, to just about around 11th. And not every single building is considered contributing to that district. There are individual buildings. But as time moves on, right, we go back to that 50-year of age mark, and we're required as a local government to resurvey places. So something that was potentially not considered eligible for listing on a national register because it wasn't 50 years of age at the time that the designation happened might be considered contributing now. And then we have our Colorado Register of Historic Properties. We have 14 properties in our city. And then also, anytime something's listed on the National Register, it's automatically placed on the state register. And then we have the Routt County Register of Historic Properties. And the Routt County Register of Historic Properties, and I'm gonna let Arianthi talk a little bit about this, but it really started preservation locally here in Steamboat with historic Routt County, which initially started under the Tread of Pioneers Museum. And they began their own registry of places, and it's an honorary program. I'll talk a little bit about the difference between honorary programs and regulatory programs.
You want me to say something?
Yes, please.
Well, the Routt County Historic Register was actually started by the county commissioners. It was a grassroots movement that was started by the advocates of the early formers of historic Routt County. And the commissioners approved it in 1993 by the time it went through all the legislative steps. And since then, Historic Routt County has worked to nominate and to work with private property owners to nominate actually over 100 buildings in Routt County. And it's not just buildings, it's also ranches in Routt County, Colorado. So that number needs to be revised, Caitlin.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll do it.
And interestingly, the Routt County Register was one of the very first countywide registers in Colorado. And so it really sort of set the way for some of the other work that happened in Western Slope, Colorado, and these rural counties. But a lot of those properties then went on to state and national register designations once they figured out how it worked and what the benefits were, and I'm not going to let you then take it from there. But that was the first step, and it really helped people understand that they had a historic property, that their property had a story worth telling and sharing with the rest of us.
Thank you, Arianthi. So talking a little bit about honorary programs. So these are our honorary programs right here. Our regulatory programs are the city's register. So when you think about placing a structure, placing your own home on a historic register, what do you guys think that means? Like, what's the first thought that comes to your mind?
You can never tear it down and sell it to someone else.
There you go. Someone else.
You can't alter the original look.
Yeah.
Lots of can'ts. Technically, those are both kind of myths, right? So, what is your name, sir?
Bill.
Bill. So Bill says you can never tear it down, right?
Or sell it.
Or sell it.
Oh, I didn't say you could
Oh, he
tear it
didn't
down,
sell it.
No.
You can't tear it down, right? So let's go back to the Crawford House. The Crawford House is on the state register and the national register. This house can be demolished. It could be sold tomorrow, and someone could tear this down. And there's nothing that our local government could do to stop that because it's not on our local register of historic places.
So it doesn't matter if we collect petitions and say, hold on, this is our last remaining building associated with it, whatever, right? Like this is why we would need, it doesn't matter how many signatures, it's up to the landowner or whomever takes over his estate or something like that. Yeah.
And now, I kind of want to pull up a picture of the FM lighthouse, but you want to do that real quick, Katie?
Do it, do it.
And what is your name?
Lynn.
Lynn.
And I was gonna mention the FM Lighthouse
Perfect.
next.
So Lynn was saying you can't change it, right? You can't change your windows. Maybe you can't put an addition on the house. That is also a myth. So I like to say that our Historic Preservation Commission and my role as the city's historic preservation planner, we exist to help guide responsible change, right? So going back.
Hold on, I don't remember the address.
Oh, you're fine. I think if you just do FM Lighthouse,
there.
it'll come up.
Oh, I could do that.
Yeah. A lot of articles on that house, you know? So, FM Light, that house is important architecturally speaking and socially, historically speaking, because of the family and their importance here.
What is the age of that house?
Oh,
Early 19th century.
1905, 1908, possibly?
It's before the train, before the railroad.
Before the railroad, so prior to 1909.
We just drive down the street here.
Perfect.
Close.
We're almost there.
I don't know if I can get.
And maybe if you go down,
Oh,
there we go.
Yeah. Oh, look, it hasn't been.
So this is, it hasn't been altered.
That's good. I'll
Perfect.
show you another one in a minute.
So this is the FM Light property. You can see as it is right now. You can build additions onto historic properties. You can build a rooftop addition. There are ways that you can do that to preserve the architectural value and original style of the home. Then there are ways that I like to say butcher it. I mean, we have Butcher Knife Creek, so it's okay. But there are inappropriate ways to alter a historic structure, and the FM Lighthouse is an example of that. The FM Lighthouse is on our state register. Is it on the National Register also? No, just the state register
And the Routt County Register.
and the Routt County Register.
They're both honorary.
So those are, again, honorary programs. And so when the new owners of the FM Lighthouse came to the city prior to their building permit to say this is what we're doing, we worked with them to help guide what they wanted to do. And it didn't really go so well in terms of preservation. Do you want to pull up what it looks like
I
now?
don't know if I can. Like I'm in Google. You'll have to drive there. But basically, there's a garage back here. You can see it. Oops. There's a garage back there where the, anyway, the garage and the house where the tree is are now one piece of building. And what we were concerned with is it gives a false sense of the scale of buildings in 1905. No matter how much money, people were not building buildings attached to garages that were 5,200 square feet. 900 square feet was modest but livable for a family of 6. 1,200 square feet is typically what we see. So even for someone of the FM Light family stature, who were relatively well-to-do, their business was hanging on but never closed down. So they had they were fairly wealthy by Steamboat standards. And this home has always been a high point and one of our most exemplary local buildings.
Oh,
I know.
what?
Well,
What's
and-
going on? Oh my gosh, we're getting
Who
pictures
is
of
this?
pilots.
But I think
Okay,
the
well-
other thing
Yeah, here we
that's
go.
important
Back to the
to
PowerPoint.
point
Back
out
to the
is
PowerPoint.
windows are the eyes of a building.
Yeah.
And when you look at a building, if the windows have been changed significantly, it tells a different story. And so you think about the early windows, they were usually wood framed, often double hung, and in really early days, there were multiple panes because the way you got the glass here was by horse and wagon. Do you think big glass would make it? No, they needed little glass. And so anyhow, picture windows just weren't common before there was good transportation. So what happened with the FM Lighthouse was that they changed out all the historic windows, the beautiful old growth wood frame windows that had been made locally with casement windows, probably vinyl frames. And maybe they changed the original siding to vinyl. Yes, vinyl. Maybe in 50 years vinyl will have a historic significance.
It probably will.
If it lasts. Anyhow, that's enough of my tirade.
What they also did is they basically built a second home onto the back of it. And there was no distinguishing between the old and the new. And so if you owned a historic home and you were going to put an addition on it, let's say, do you think that you would want the addition to look just like the historic home or different? Different is the correct answer. So you want it to be compatible, right? But again, we couldn't stop what they were doing because it wasn't on the local register.
What would have protected it? What would have protected it from being
Good question.
Perfect.
on the local register?
Next.
If it were on the Steamboat Springs Register of Historic Places, we would have been able to deny their building permit.
What about the Thorn, the old Bill and Dorothy Thorn home on 14, County Road 14?
Well, that's a county.
That's a county thing? No.
Yep. And so, I'll get to your question in a second. So we're considered a certified local government, the city of Steamboat Springs. So that's a federal program that allows the state to basically defer regulatory protection through local governments, either at the county or at the city level. And Routt County is not a certified local government. It is a goal of theirs to become one. And in order to have a regulatory program to stop certain demolitions from happening or certain inappropriate alterations from happening, you have to have an ordinance, right? You have to put it in your development code. It ties both to planning departments and building departments, and it allows us to help regulate change, right? Not stop change, but regulate it.
I'm wondering if the owner has to agree to be on the register. Is that a barrier?
Yep, that's a great question. So
Depends where you live.
depends where you live. I'll give you an example. In Steamboat Springs, yes, you have to have owner consent to be on the local register. In Boulder, Colorado, which is where I lived and worked before I came here, their local government has the ability to what's called designate without owner consent. And that scares people, right? Scares people.
They shift in ownership rights.
Right. But it is allowed. And I'll give you a really great example. There are, I want to say, over about 500 properties in Boulder that are on the local register. How many do you think are on the local register because they were placed there without the owner's consent? 6. Of which, a few of them the city owns. Because in some places like Boulder, their version of historic Routt County, historic Boulder, which helped create their ordinance, has the ability to designate.
going along with the question of the ownership, so we said before that the property could be sold. So if the original owner put it on the register, does that mean everyone else who buys it has to buy with that consent, or they can say, well, I don't want to do that anymore?
That's correct. So once it is designated on the local register, that designation is actually recorded with the property deed with the county. And so the designation is tied to the structure.
Here in Mansfield, what is the age? I know some of the buildings are
Well, Perry
registered.
Mansfield is a little bit different, and we can talk about the history of that, but technically it's in the county. So it's so close to the city.
And when was it constructed?
Well, the camp itself started in 1914, but they moved some old mining cabins to the site. So that backs it up to 1890s.
Just about.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about the history of moving buildings in Steamboat here in a minute, because you are sitting in a moved building.
Can you just elaborate again, what is the governing body that creates the zoning and allows people to change this? I'm thinking about the places like in Aspen, West End, but I doubt every house in West End is designated historical, but I assume that the city of Aspen planning department doesn't allow for outrageous modifications of, taking a 1,700 square foot home or 1,200 square foot home, turning it into 6,000 square feet. It happens, but it's not
That's correct.
completely gone. So what is it, you said it was Route County that has the ability to do that, or doesn't?
The city of Steamboat Springs, so our municipality, our government,
Through the
Yep.
planning.
through the
department.
planning department. Yep, so we have an ordinance and then we have regulatory code. And our code is in our revised code and our community development code. And Steamboat Springs, our history is very different, right? When you think about a historic building, you think about a huge mansion or a colorful little Aspen building. We have modest structures here. We were miners, we were ranchers. And so what we think of as historic from the built environment looks a lot different than in other ski towns or Denver or Boulder. And so it's kind of hard for people to wrap their heads around that, right? And the way that our regulations are currently set here in Steamboat could use a little tweaking so we can better apply our zoning and our planning codes to help preserve some of these modest structures, right? Some other ski towns such as Aspen and Crested Butte are getting real creative because they have the same problems that we do with growth and development and increase in population and people coming from out of town. I believe it's Crested Butte, but they're actually moving historic structures. So typically a house sits in the center of a lot, right? Or in the front or in the rear of the lot, which creates a problem zoning wise for building onto that. You can only put so much of a building on one lot. So they are actually moving the historic structure to, let's say, the top right of the lot, and then they're building in the rest of the lot. So there are structures covering that whole lot, but that's what they're doing in some other ski towns to help save their historic structures.
So what incentives does the city have to get the owners to agree to be on this historic register?
That's a great question. So, in my opinion, professional opinion, the biggest incentive is preserving that place, right? So, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, in 200 years, that place is still there. That is the biggest incentive, right? That's the intangible yet tangible incentive. We also have the ability to offer you state historic preservation tax credits. So going back to Lynn's original question about you can't change anything. Yes, you can. And you can get money for changing it. So if your house is on our local register Or if it's on the state or national register, let's say you need to do a roof replacement. Roofs are expensive. If it's a residential property, and because we're in a rural community, we're considered rural due to our population size, you can get up to 35% at a max of $50,000 for your restoration or rehabilitation project. It includes things like helping refund new electrical. We all know old buildings are sometimes not up to code. Plumbing, window replacement. It even covers interior remodels. I grew up in a historic home, a 1908 bungalow in Park Hill in Denver, and my mother got tax credits to remove an interior wall, remove a rear door, and to open up our kitchen and make like a, open kitchen family room. And she got $50,000 for that. It paid for our kitchen.
Thanks, gambling in Colorado.
Yes. So what funds that, right? Gambling.
Gambling.
Okay.
Some other benefits are, so does anyone know the difference between a commercial property and a residential property? Yes, right. Well, let's say you have a mother-in-law suite.
Cool.
It's a historic carriage house, and you rent that out. But you live in your house in the front. Because it's income generating, it's considered commercial. You can get millions of dollars for commercial
Yeah.
federal tax credit.
Let's go back to this picture. Have you guys been downtown on Yampa Street? This is 910 Yampa. It used to be, well, a number of things, but the old YVA building. And it's still very identifiable as the old YVA building because of the windows and the openings that were giant garage doors. That project was multi-phase, multi-year, if you recall. Oh gosh,
I think they received $2 million.
They received almost $3 million in tax credits to upgrade the building and make it what it is today, which I think we can all agree is like now the heart of a bustling downtown Yampa street area, resident, foot traffic. So it isn't that historic preservation wants to not make buildings available for reuse. It's we want to help guide how the building appears to make it the most historically identifiable, but also move it into its new use. So there's no reason that you need to live at 900 square feet. Historic preservation just wants to help guide how that change is going to happen, because change affects us all, right? How we feel when we walk around downtown is a universal thing. We all see the same things. So it's just a way to help minimize the change over time so that our history continues to be showcased, but it's not, you of course can change color, you can add bedrooms, and there's lots of successful ways that is done. And there's tax credits to help you do it. It's very successful, or it could be if people would utilize it.
So I understand the issue of tax credits for the exterior of the building, but in your personal example, the interior of your childhood home that, the public will never see, but what's the purpose of tax credits there?
Well, because my mother could have chosen to put an addition on the home and change it that way. And then you are significantly altering the exterior of the building. And so when you are receiving tax credits at the state or federal level, they are looking for a little bit tighter, right, of those rules and regulations. They do want things to stay relatively the same from the exterior and also from the interior. And so my mother's house didn't visually change from the front of the street, and that's kind of what they're looking at. So that's a great question. Will you go back to the picture real quick, Katie? Of the
910?
Yeah. So, I don't know if you can see this, but right here is the original historic building, right? It's also on a corner. And so when you're standing on the corner, that building looks the exact same as it did when it was first built. When you turn the corner, this is their addition. You can see it's distinctively different than the original building. And they just built it right on. It's a huge addition. And see kind of the difference there?
Right, I
Yeah.
was surprised at the interior credits for interior work.
Yep, and so this building did receive credits for a lot of the interior. The interior relatively stayed the same. They did modify some bathrooms, but
I think the purpose of the interior is to encourage people to not tear down the house.
Oh, I see.
It's
To
gonna
keep it
stop someone
livable.
from tearing down the house and saying, fine, then I'll build something bigger, whatever I
But
want
if
to
it's
build.
listed, you don't have the right to tear it down, as I understood from earlier.
No,
correct, but also,
conditions.
you can receive state tax credits and federal tax credits if it's on an honorary program too. If it's on the state register or the national register. So hypothetically, you could get $2 million for this project. This building is locally designated, I believe.
Yes.
Yep, so it can't be torn down, but let's say it was just on the state register. You could get $2 million to do that and it could be sold to another owner and they could tear it down.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
bouncing off his question, that's all public record on
The,
how the funds were expended. So theoretically,
correct,
you could do a FOIA or Freedom of Information Act request to find out how your mother spent the money.
correct.
Okay.
Yep, through a HORA request, yep.
So did the Harbor Hotel get torn down before this was all in place?
This, you want to hear about, there are so many sad stories.
About the Harbor Hotel.
We have to talk about, the wins and the losses. The Harbor Hotel was a loss.
Yes.
There were many, many of us, and you were here when that was happening, who championed saving the Harbor Hotel. And the developers at the time were not forthright in their evaluation of the structure of the building, which was actually built to sustain 2 more stories. When it was built and I think opened in 1938. It could have been a great building, but it ended up getting stripped down and there was no, I think that happened just before Steamboat got its preservation ordinance, is what I'm thinking. It was right on the cusp of that time. And there was no way the people involved in that project were interested in preserving history. They bought the property, they sold the furniture, they stripped all the siding interior. They didn't listen to the stories, and the hotel went down. It was heartbreaking. But we saved the Arnold Barn.
I believe that was actually after our ordinance was in place. And going back to how at a national movement, at a locally, we're rethinking preservation, right? So the Harbor Hotel had many additions and physical changes to the exterior and interior over time. And when we look at if a resource is eligible for historic designation, we look at what changes have occurred over time. And so Katie's gonna try to find an
They
initial
added,
picture. They added a second story.
this mansard top.
They
which
added
is
a mansard
How
top.
we remember it, if you remember it from the 90s and early 2000s.
Right.
Can you see that?
But over time, some changes develop historical importance and merit of their own right. And sometimes people forget about that when they're looking at a structure and trying to figure out, is this important? And so a lot of times we have surveys of properties where we say, oh, well, this had an addition put on the back of it, so it's not historically important. Well, maybe the addition was put on in 1948 at a time when people needed more space. Or maybe today, if we were to look at that addition, would we approve that from a planning and building standpoint if it wasn't jeopardizing the home's, architectural importance? And if you guys kind of go back to the house of Charles Sheriff Neiman, technically locally right now, our evaluation says that house is not eligible for designation on the local register because of the addition of the garage. But architectural importance is only one form of determining if something is historically important. It also has that social importance to it. So should it be on our local register? Next slide, Katie.
Down here.
So back to your question about benefits of listing. We have the tangible, we have intangible. There are funds available to help you, modernize your house, to help you preserve your house. Let's say that the Harbor Hotel was still here. Well, we would look at, we don't like the mansard roof. We don't think that that is what is architecturally important. You could get tax credits to basically remove the roof and restore it back to what it looked like in the 50s. At the local level, we also provide you with waivers on all your planning and building permit fees, which can add up if you're doing significant changes. I mean, you're talking thousands of dollars. And then we also will waive city sales tax on locally purchased goods and services. And so, yep, there we go.
Is that the Scandinavian Lodge, that formal picture?
No.
Oh, I should talk about this.
Yeah.
So this is the Ptarmigan Inn. Yep.
Guess what? The ski area just turned 50. A lot of those buildings.
Yep. So people think, again, back to what is historic, what can be historically important. Well, the ptarmigan is historically important. And they're actually considering putting it on the local register, which I think is wonderful. So it's a great example of one of our first condominium buildings at the base of the mountain. I believe it was built in 1975. And it is architecturally important because it's an example of mountain chalet architectural style.
It's also the best bar of the ski area.
There you go.
I've heard.
Priorities.
So, what do we use to guide changes? We use the Secretary of the Interior's standards for the treatment of historic properties. So, one standard is preservation, so keeping something exactly how it is. One standard is rehabilitation, which includes putting an addition on, or changing your windows, but leaving the openings the same. Another standard is reconstruction. So let's say you want to reconstruct the Harbor Hotel, if it were still standing, and bring it back to a certain period of time. And another standard is restoration, which also achieves the same as reconstruction. You're just not necessarily reconstructing certain features. And then we have our local historic preservation design guidelines, which are currently based on residential Old Town. We just completed a recent survey of the Mount Warner base area, where we surveyed homes that are recently 50 years of age. And so we'll be updating our historic design guidelines to include social histories and architectural histories of buildings from the mid-century and post-mid-century time. And I just like showing, back one.
Oh, gosh.
How Mount Warner has changed over time. So you have Mount Warner in the 46 to 56 area, and that's well before the resort began. And then you have it in 1985, and you can see some of the slight development, the roads, the houses, and you have what it is today, which I think is a great reminder of, how precious not just the physical built environment is, but all of the landscapes and the land around Steamboat. We don't have much more land, right, to build. And that's why I think historic preservation is so important moving forward, because it helps us responsibly grow as a community. So how can we responsibly maintain the look, the feel, the setting of Steamboat without removing places that are already existing? I just like this. You can next it. And again, there's the ptarmigan back in the day. And then right there, so you can see, I mean, these places have been around for a long time. It's not your Victorian mansion, it's a condominium, but they're important, right? And so again, if you would like to list property locally, yes, you need owner approval. Staff works with you and helps you draft an application. Our Historic Preservation Commission reviews that application, and the timeline really isn't that long. Maybe takes 1 to 2 months. And questions? Any final questions?
I have concerns about Steamboat, because you're all local, becoming overcooked. And what's going to happen with the old, we call it the old junior high, what it says on it is the high school on 7th Street. What's going to happen to that building?
That's a really great question.
Could you repeat the question?
So she's asking what's going to happen with the high school on 7th Street.
Yeah. 7th
Um,
and Pine, just,
Yeah.
It is the high school. The junior high was demolished in the 60s, but they were similar because they were both brick. So we commonly confuse the two, but the one that's standing now is a high school, and it's owned by the school district.
so
Ariante's worked on it a number of years, because she's worked on everything.
Well, Historic Route County and preservation advocates in the community have worked with the school district for really more than a decade, maybe 2 decades, to try to encourage them to list their historic building on a historic register. Any historic register would be wonderful because it would document the history of this very prominent building. We have done pro formas that we gave to the superintendent of the school board many iterations ago, and keep sending them back and saying, here is what is possible. And there has been cursory interest, but no follow-up. And I think the most recent sort of finger in the eye was when they changed out the windows on 7th Street to be some sort of not appropriate update. And so that was compromising the historic integrity of the building. The school district could in fact benefit greatly from being on any historic register and participating to get its history documented, to get access to a lot of tax benefits, state historical fund grants. But so far, it's been a blank wall, I could say. So there are school districts throughout Colorado that have been responsive, that have done stellar projects, but we don't find that here at RE2. I must say that Sirocco, we did work with the Sirocco High School. It is on the Route County Register. They did get grants, and we did find the money to fix the steps to their entrance, but not Steamboat.
And interestingly enough, I will say that, you know, there are no plans to demolish the high school because they are doing a major renovation right now. It was an eye-opener for me in my role about a month ago when I got an email from our building official, Todd Carr, and he said, they're doing some physical changes, here's what they're doing. We have an intergovernmental agreement, our Route County Building Department, with the school district, and it's a state government agreement where only 2 people can review changes to Route County's buildings, the building official and the fire marshal. And Todd Carr is a secret little preservationist himself, and he let me honorarily review it, so we at least have a record of that change in our permitting system. So,
But it really could be an activated, amazing space if we would allow historic preservation to put money towards it and really allow the community to weigh in on what it could be. But right now, Yampa Valley High School operates out of it, as well as, you know, a number of other
Boys and Girls
We're
Club.
doing a great job using the facility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have no complaints about that. I just see visions of affordable housing.
Exactly.
Apartment units
Yes,
out there.
yeah.
And,
Yeah, it's all
So-
possible.
To kind of end on a balanced note, and adding on to the last question, you guys all know where the Western Lodge is, right? So that property has been for sale for a while. And it's not just that property, the owners own the lot directly behind it where we believe Steamboat's oldest residence currently stands. And then they own the lot behind that. And I've been working with them to look at, is the Western Lodge historically important? Hypothetically, it's an eligible resource, but it's not listed.
Right.
So it could be demolished and there could be housing there. But if we saved everything, nothing would be important, right? And so you really have to weigh when you're looking at what do we do with this lot, with this land? What is going to benefit our community? We all know we need affordable housing. That site will likely be redeveloped. The Western Lodge may stay, they may add on to it. My professional goal is to make sure that that one oldest home, that white house, remains in place. So you really have to balance when you come to decision making, because we can't save everything. So,
But don't forget, historic preservation and sustainability really go hand in hand. So
Yeah.
it is significantly less impactful to the environment and budget to keep a building standing than it is to completely demolish it and store that building material somewhere else and rebuild than it is to retrofit and make an old building continue its life. And a lot of these buildings, the Harbor Hotel was 97% concrete. That thing was not going anywhere. So a lot of our older buildings are actually built to last longer and have lasted longer than some of the stuff we've been putting up lately, so. They go hand in hand.
I've got one example of preservation and sustainability. And you mentioned moved buildings, but the moved building success story that we are so proud of is there was a wonderful log cabin on Oak Street, the Selby Cabin. It was where the new Human Services Center is for the county. Well, there was so much support for somehow preserving that building. And Historic Route County worked with the county commissioners and really championed having that building moved to a new location. And so the commissioners thought, yes, this is an example of sustainability. They put out an RFP for the community members to come up with ideas. Who should get this building? What will it be used for? And give us your best ideas. Well, the Steamboat Mountain School came up with the winning proposal, and good news, the building was moved in 2021 up to Whiteman School. That was a feat in the early hours of the morning. Then the contractor who was supposed to do the foundation bailed. That was happening a lot of projects, as we all know. And fortunately, the foundation got dug and installed in 2022. The building is now in place. Faculty is moving in about 3 weeks. The Whiteman School, or Steamboat Mountain School people say that they probably saved $200,000 by reusing an existing building built by a master craftsman that is sympathetic to the culture of and the appearance of the Steamboat Mountain School. So, it's a success story.
And low-income housing.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
And low-income housing.
And low-income housing for faculty. I mean, it works.
And I will say, moving a building is never your first option,
That's right.
to preserve a building. But when demolition is imminent, and it will happen, moving a building is a last resort. And unfortunately, there are times when, I log on to my City View permitting portal and there's a demolition permit that comes up and I have 1 day to review it.
Ugh.
And based upon our code and regulation, if our Historic Preservation Commission denies that application, the permit will still be issued in 30 days, which provides us 30 days to figure out what to do with the building, which is not much time at all.
Right.
So it's really important to allow enough time to work with your local planning department and building department if you want to change a building. Yes.
I wanted to compliment the city of Steamboat Springs. I think the most important building in this town is our library. And they made it a modern musical library. We have Wi-Fi. When we lived down in Eagle for a few years, they had this lovely library and 4 computers hooked up to phone dial-in computers. They had 20 computers, but only 4 of them could be used for the internet. But the way they married a modern facility and refused to get rid of Bud Werner,
Yep.
I think that's just says a lot about the culture we have and the people we have who are committed to this community.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the library is a wonderful example of a preservation project gone right. And so is our Centennial Hall, where our council chambers are. You stand in front of that building and to the right, you can see the Carver Power Plant. And then you can see the huge addition that we've put on and modernized. So we can operate as a government, right? Well, thank you everyone. I hope that you guys learned